What if I told you that the finer is better rule for winter fishing line is the biggest lie you've been told? That the obsession with using a gossamer thin line in January might actually be scaring fish away, not tricking them? You heard me right. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into a topic that most anglers think they have figured out: choosing your line for the coldest month of the year. I promise you, by the end of this, you'll look at that spool of 0.1 millimeter line completely differently. I am going to reveal the hidden reason so many people sit for hours without a single bite, and it has nothing to do with the bait. So let me ask you this right now. Do you believe a thicker line can outfish a thinner one in crystal clear winter water? Let the debate begin in the comments. For decades, the logic has been drilled into our heads. January comes, the water gets cold, the fish slow down and their metabolism drops. The water under the ice is often incredibly clear, so the conclusion seems obvious. You need the thinnest, most invisible line possible to avoid spooking these wary, lethargic fish. It makes sense on the surface. We've all been there, spooling up with a line so thin you can barely see it yourself, thinking we're gaining the ultimate stealth advantage. This is the de facto wisdom passed down from one generation of ice fishermen to the next. But this logic ignores one crucial game-changing factor: physics. The brutal, unforgiving physics of how materials behave in sub-zero temperatures. First, let's bust that lethargic fish myth. Yes, their metabolism slows down, but they still need to eat. They aren't sleeping on the bottom. They are often just less willing to travel far for a meal. When they decide to feed, it can be just as aggressive as any other time of year. The real challenge isn't their laziness, it's presenting your bait in a way that looks 100% natural and effortless. And that brings us to the number one enemy of a natural presentation in winter: line memory. Imagine this. Your thin monofilament line has been sitting on a small diameter reel spool in the freezing cold. When you pull it off, it doesn't hang straight. It looks like a coiled spring, a slinky. This is especially true for cheap, thin monofilament. Now picture your tiny tungsten jig or a delicate live bait at the end of that coiled spring. How is it supposed to look natural? Every tiny movement you make, every subtle shift in the current, is absorbed or distorted by the coils in the line. The bait doesn't flutter or drift, it jerks and pivots unnaturally. This is a massive red flag for any fish that swims by for a look. Think of it this way: you're trying to tempt a wary perch. It sees what looks like a tiny, easy meal, but the meal is twitching and moving as if it's attached to a stiff wire. That's not food, that's a trap. The fish sees the unnatural movement long before it ever sees the line itself. The presentation is dead in the water. Okay, so you say, I'll just use fluorocarbon, it's invisible. Yes, fluorocarbon has a refractive index closer to water, making it less visible. That's a fact. But it has its own set of problems in the bitter cold, especially the ultra-thin stuff. The truth is, standard fluorocarbon is often much stiffer than monofilament to begin with. When you take it into sub-freezing temperatures, that stiffness gets even worse. An ultra-thin fluoro line can have even more memory and coil than a comparable mono. You've traded a little bit of visibility for a presentation that's even more rigid and unnatural. Let's move beyond just the look. Let's talk about feel. A stiff, coiled line transmits horrible vibrations. When you're trying to impart a subtle quiver to your lure, a stiff line can create a jarring, high-frequency buzz that fish can feel through their lateral line. It's the equivalent of someone shouting in a quiet library. It doesn't attract fish, it puts them on high alert. So that whole invisibility argument we've clung to for years, It's massively overrated in this context. A fish is an instinct-driven creature. It's programmed to react to movement and pressure waves first, and visual details second. If the movement is wrong, it doesn't matter if the line is made of thin air. The fish is already gone. Here's the radical idea. Sometimes a slightly thicker but much higher quality soft monofilament is the superior choice. I'm not talking about going from a 0.1 to a 0.25. I'm talking about maybe going from a stiff 0.12 to a premium, supple 0.14 millimeter line. And here's the simple reason why that works. A premium, soft monofilament is engineered to have less memory. It hangs straighter even when it's 5 degrees below zero. It comes off the spool without looking like a pig's tail. It creates a more direct and honest link between you and your bait. With that softer line, your bait can finally do what it's supposed to do. It can hang perfectly horizontal. It can quiver with the slightest touch. It can move with the subtle underwater currents, looking like a free-floating, living thing. It looks like an easy meal, not a puppet on a string. Let's put ourselves in the fish's fins for a second. You see two potential meals. One is twitching and bouncing weirdly. The other is drifting and fluttering in a gentle, lifelike way. Which one are you going to eat? It's a no-brainer. The natural presentation wins every single time. The unnatural, jerky movement that comes from a stiff, thin line literally screams danger to fish. Their survival has depended on recognizing these wrong signals for millions of years. You aren't outsmarting them with thinness, you are alerting them with stiffness. Here's a real-world scenario. You're sight fishing for big bluegills in 3 feet of crystal clear water. They can see everything. You drop down your tiny jig on a coiled, stiff 0.08 line. You watch as the fish approaches, looks, and then turns away in disgust. They saw the lie. Now imagine you switch to a soft 0.12 line. The line hangs straight. The jig sits perfectly. You give it a tiny shake and it pulses seductively. The next fish that comes in doesn't hesitate, it just inhales it. The line diameter didn't matter, the bait's behavior did. Let's also talk about your ability to work the lure. With a stiff line full of memory, you lose all sensitivity. You can't feel those ultra-subtle bites. The coils in the line act like a shock absorber, dampening the signal before it ever reaches your rod tip. You're fishing blind. And what happens when you finally do get a bite? With a super thin line, the hookset can be tricky. There's very little margin for error. A slightly thicker, quality line gives you a bit more backbone and confidence when you drive that hook home, especially when you're dealing with a bigger-than-expected fish. Don't forget about abrasion resistance. The edge of the hole you drilled in the ice is like a razor blade. A line that's as thin as a hair has zero chance if a good fish makes a run and scrapes it against that edge. A little bit of extra thickness provides a world of insurance. Finally, this all leads to a new way of thinking. You should be shopping for your winter line based on its properties, not just its diameter. Look for words like supple, low memory, and specifically for ice fishing. These lines are engineered to stay manageable in the cold. So the rule we need to adopt isn't thinner is always better. The new rule for January fishing is this: the most manageable and softest line for the situation is always better. Prioritize presentation over perceived invisibility. Your catch rate will thank you for it. So let's wrap this up. For years, we've chased thinner and thinner diameters, thinking it was the key to winter success. But we've been focusing on the wrong thing. The real secret, the major turning point, is understanding that line behavior in the cold trumps line visibility almost every time. The big aha moment is realizing that your stiff, coiled, ultra-thin line is actively working against you, making your bait look fake and alarming the very fish you're trying to catch. Going up slightly in diameter to a higher quality, softer line isn't a compromise. It's a strategic advantage that gives you a more natural presentation, better sensitivity, and more confidence. This simple switch could be the single biggest change you make to turn a frustrating day of staring at the ice into a memorable day of catching fish. Thank you so much for watching. If this video challenged what you thought you knew, hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more content that breaks the mold. Now for the real discussion, what's the biggest fishing rule you've broken that ended up working? Share your story in the comments below.